also talks about her mental health and how she wasn't able to get any help. Joining me today to discuss what was talked about in the interview is Professor Tim Wilson, a political analyst. Thank you for joining me, Mr. Professor Wilson.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here.
And what do you make of all of this? You're there in England. You're probably hearing more about it than we are. There are two sides.
Yes.
Please tell us.
Well, I have a lot of sympathy for Meghan. I mean, she commands sympathy, and I like Harry. But it doesn't mean that I endorse the whole pathetic display. And actually, I use that adjective very precisely because this was a hatchet job predicated on pathos, a sob story with a punch. It's an attack on the institution and on the Queen at a time when her husband is in hospital, and I've heard some say that he's gravely ill, and the timing and the content needs to be challenged. And I think we should reserve real sympathy for Meghan's victims. So there are 4 revelations in the interview, 3 by Meghan about race, honesty and mental health. They're significant. And then there's the additional information about the disintegration of Harry's relationship with his father, which is astonishingly bold and destructive, and frankly, he should know better. The whole thing is couched in a sort of woke vocabulary, and you're quite right, it seems scripted. It's remarkably professional, almost rehearsed. Of course, Meghan is an actress. She knows how to handle scripted content. She knows how to do these things. What else can I say? My thoughts. I'm disappointed.
You're disappointed. Well, a lot's been going on. I mean, of course, if there is any... I mean, we've known the royal family in England. I grew up in England. We've known the royal family in England to make an effort to always do these international trips, especially to the Commonwealth countries. That's why I truly find it very hard to believe this racism side. And also, I think in the interview, she never actually said who was racist. She just put it out there. She never really blamed anybody. She just said somebody was racist. It's almost like, you know, playing that racist card. And you used the word woke, which is very, you know, popular
Yes.
these days. But is this truly a cry for help, or is it a cry for attention, do you think?
Well, you actually raised 2 points there. Number one, you talk about the racist issue, and this thing about the potential colour of the baby. But in fact, that's in the context of this whole discussion about honesty and about being denied or being given a title, and the protection. And what's done in that interview is something so clever. Meghan pulls focus by suddenly talking about racism. And so we take the information about the protection and the title more seriously than perhaps we should. And as for how the baby looks, I'm sure that conversation took place. But I suspect it may have had as much to do with whether he was born ginger or might lose his hair at the age of 21. All families speculate about whether a child will take after his father or his mother. Now, as for the issue of cry for help, as I said, I've got a lot of sympathy for Meghan's story, particularly about feeling suicidal. So here I think the accent slightly shifts, because in the UK, a prime-time breakfast show presenter simply said that he disbelieved her.
Piers Morgan.
Yes, and this, I was going to try and avoid mentioning his name, but this puts out a very ugly message about mental health support from a channel that's actually directly promoting mental health charities, as did Harry. Mm-hmm. You know, if Meghan was feeling so wretched, there were charities that Harry represented that could have helped. Instead, she went to the HR department in the palace, which beggars all belief. I mean, I never realised the palace had an HR department. So was it all part of her plan to create herself as a victim, to demand blanket press coverage? That's the only context in which I can imagine her visiting the HR department. But we live in a constitutional democracy with a free press. This means the tabloids are free to report what they wish.
Well, that's my next point, actually. I mean, I grew up in the 80s in England, and we've always had this, I don't want to badmouth any paper, but a lot of these tabloid papers really did sensationalize everything. And good or bad, I mean, you have this trolling on the internet. We're trying to get rid of that. These tabloids can't help. This must make people feel terrible. And more to the point, if you're, maybe a loved one that was formerly a famous person, an actress, suddenly the center of attention in not a good way. It can't be easy. Maybe there should be restrictions on how much the tabloids could really do.
Well, I think it's not just the tabloids. We now have social media as well. It's a it's a vicious circle. The tabloids feed on the gossip, and the gossip is provided. I think we desperately need some sort of legislation to protect people from this sort of invasive scrutiny. But Piers Morgan, you mentioned him. He was involved in the phone tacking, trapping business. He was involved in doctoring photographs. He takes offence at what at Meghan's claim that she was suicidal. I don't think he really has a leg to stand on. I was so shocked, and she goes into details as well. I mean, it's a very, very convincing narrative that she tells. I was immensely struck by her story about not wanting to be alone and being taken by Harry to the Cirque du Soleil evening, and then weeping when the lights went down. I must say, I went to the Cirque du Soleil and I fell asleep when the lights went down. But I do feel sorry for Meghan, and I do feel sorry that she had such a bad experience. She's somebody who needs help. She needs sympathy. She certainly doesn't need a dressing down from Piers Morgan. But I do think that the whole course of the interview was deeply, deeply wrong.
Yeah. There's other things, actually. She talked about Archie not getting a title. I did a little bit of research myself. I don't think he's entitled to a title, is he?
He isn't. You're quite right. This goes back to 1917, to George V, who set out these rules.
Yeah.
He is, however, entitled to, and I suspect he cannot avoid his inheritance of being the Earl of Dumbarton, I think. And as for protection, the other royal babies received protection. For example, Princess Beatrice and Eugenie received protection, but as they grew older, they lost that. Right. I think Harry and Meghan, they're revealing themselves as mixed up, immature. I think there's a wider plot here.
I think
I think they were.
They sort of seem to have wanted to be royals. This is a narrative that I've read, that they wanted to be royals. They wanted sort of the title, and everybody wanted to treat them like princes and princesses, but they didn't want to do any of the work. They just wanted I'm just going to go and retire off to my mansion in California and have my bodyguards and be famous and happy and live happily ever after.
I think this is a dangerous interpretation. But yes, I have heard lots and lots of stories, and the rumor mill is rife at the moment. And for example, the whole issue of the counter story of Meghan being a bully.
Exactly. Yeah. We've heard that she was bullying some members of staff in the royal household. But what I do want to say, if I do have my 2 minutes on air here, is that the royal family for me has always been an institution, and it's always been a sort of a job. I don't think I'm almost certain that most people, or most of the royal family, regret being in the royal family because they've got so much sort of prim and properness to be. But I don't know. Do you have any feelings on that? You said you're a royalist. You like the fact that the royal family is part of the institution.
I think it must be very, very difficult to be a member of the royal family, and you've got to remember the Queen was thrust into this without expecting it. Right. She was part of the extended royal family, but she certainly she wasn't born into an expectation that she would be Queen. So it's something she's had to adapt to. And she seems to have done it very, very well. And as for racism, I cannot think of a person who's done more to embrace the Commonwealth and people of a diverse background.
I totally agree with you.
I think she's led. She's led supremely well, and more than that, just think of the rapturous response that Meghan got when she was introduced to us, and at the wedding. Things have gone suddenly very sour, and I don't quite know at what point that happened. I think Meghan wanted the palace to muzzle the press, but no one has managed to do that. And I also think that there is a narrative that she wanted to recapture the spirit of Princess Diana, Harry's mother, and I think that's a dangerous route to have gone down if that was indeed the issue. Once you embrace the media, as Diana did, as Meghan have done, it's a very, very dangerous
double-edged sword, if you like, a double-edged sword. You don't know what could.
Yes. Because on the one hand, you're the talk of the town. One day you're defining the way that everybody should be living, and the next day you are completely irrelevant. I think of Nigel Farage's downward trajectory after Brexit.
Right.
And the royal family have got into this habit of simply saying no comment, and I don't think that was good enough for Meghan Markle.
Have they come out? Have they come out and said anything this time? I've not followed it today. Have they come out? No statements have been made.
There's been no statement, and I don't expect there'll be a statement for quite a long time. The appropriate response to this is to say nothing. I mean, I actually wonder, if you examine that interview very carefully, it's the sort of interview that pulls away from making clear statements. It appears to be a clear statement, but it isn't. So even when you go back to that thing about the colour of the babies, the colour of the baby, Meghan says potentially she cannot even bring herself to say yes.
Right.
So we need to speculate. We have to say who had this conversation. We may be speculating about a wider conspiracy about, for example, like who might succeed the Queen, whatever happened to Diana. But it seems to me that this interview was there to spark interest and to spark conversation. It wasn't really there to provide answers or clear information.
And of course, the world of TV, we all know how to do some excellent editing. And we don't exactly know what parts were cut out and what parts were left in there. But Professor Tim Wilson, thank you very much for your time today, and I hope to have a chat with you again on A News. Thank you.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.